Could take your seats. We have some good news to share today, I think, and so we want to get to that. To begin our program, let me have come up to give you a welcome Dr. Chris Kimball, CLU's president. Chris?
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning. Welcome to campus on this crisp, cool morning. For those of you that haven't been here for a while or not at all, please note the exciting project we have going on across the way here, our William Rowland Football Stadium. I hope the construction noises won't interrupt this this morning. When I saw the title for this session, I thought of the old joke that the light in the tunnel was an oncoming train, and that reflected the news that I've been hearing from Bill Watkins over the last couple of years. And I often tease Bill for being an even more pessimistic person than I am. But in all seriousness, one of the great joys of the university the last few years is to have Bill and his colleagues, Dan Hamilton and Kirk Lesh, come and join us at Cal Lutheran, setting up CERF and continuing to do high-quality work here on campus, and more importantly, to serve the wider community. While Bill, I don't think, has a reputation for being an overly optimistic sort, I think the track record shows that the forecasts that he's done have been pretty much right on the money, and a welcome antidote to those who might want to give happier news that really doesn't have much connection to reality. So it's a great joy to have this event today, the second one over in West County at noontime, and to have a chance for the university to show off the work of one of its outstanding units, CERF, headed by Bill Watkins and his team. It's also a special joy to have as our other keynote speaker, Jack O'Connell. Lucky enough to be at an event last night honoring Jack's contributions to teachers in the county and, of course, statewide. You'll hear a little bit more about his background if you don't already know it. I'm really delighted to say that he has agreed this spring to be a commencement speaker, actually at both of our commencements, graduate and undergraduate. I don't know how we talked him into the 2-for-1 speech thing. And even more importantly, he will accept an honorary doctorate this spring from Cal Lutheran, and so we're honored to be able to add Dr. O'Connell to our alumni rolls. And so I think you're going to have a terrific morning hearing both from Bill and Jack. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Chris. A couple of housekeeping things. We'll get right to it. This would be a good time to turn your cell phone off or set your phaser to stun or whatever you need to do. Restrooms are all the way across the lobby on the left side. Feel free to get up during the presentations and fill your coffee cup if you want to. We need to take a minute to thank our board members and our sponsors. The sponsor list has been up on the screen, and it is also in your packet. You have, in the little brochure, you have all of the sponsor logos on here, and they are literally too numerous to mention, which is a great tribute to the work of our board of volunteers. The board, people from the business and professional community help us define the program, identify interesting topics, find compelling speakers, and they raise money. Many board members are themselves sponsors, and they also recruit other sponsors. So we could just take a minute. Would the board members of CERF please rise and be recognized? And if there are sponsors here who did not already stand as board members, would they please rise? Thank you, Sal. Thank you, Henry. We have two speakers today, two compelling topics. In Ventura County and the Tri-Counties, we talk a lot about the quality of life here, and certainly with appropriate reasons. Bill Watkins often says quality of life for many families starts with a good job, so we want to hear how the economy is doing. And I think Jack O'Connell will be the first to agree that getting that good job often depends on having a good education, and increasingly so. And we need to understand what the state of education is in this area and in the state of California, and what we can do to sustain and enhance it over time. So I look forward to both presentations. And with that, let me introduce Dr. Bill Watkins. Bill was a banker in Ventura County for, he says in his thing here, approximately. I always thought estimates were supposed to be more precise than that, but approximately 19 years. Went back to graduate school, earned his doctorate in economics at UCSB, went to the Fed in Washington, and was an economist for the Fed for a couple of years, came back and ran the UCSB forecast project for almost a decade, and as Chris said, we're delighted to have he and his team here at CLU. Dr. Bill Watkins.
Good morning, welcome. And I have to tell you, we're doing two events today. One is here, and then we're doing lunch in Ventura, and that's because most people won't go over the grade. I don't know what it is, but it's a wall. But there's also a few people here who are going to be at the one in the afternoon, and that says a lot about them. I'm not sure what it says, but I sure appreciate them. So thank you who do that. They're gluttons for punishment, I guess. So that's not the right button. Aha, okay. So this is Greg Mankiw. I go to his website almost every day. He's the author of the most popular economics textbook out there, and I would recommend that you guys go once a week or so. He updates it at most maybe twice a day, and occasionally goes a couple days when he's grading or something, and he doesn't do that. But one of the things he says is one thing we don't do very well is forecast the economy. And this gives me an opportunity to sort of tell you about how accurate or how inaccurate we've been over the past couple of years. My team, right after the financial crisis of 2008, September 2008, figured out that there was a regime shift, and we started adjusting our models. When we came here from UC Santa Barbara, we brought with us no intellectual capital. We had a deal. We left our models there. We had to redo our models. And we wrote the models sort of to optimize our forecasting in this environment. And the result has been that we've been very accurate on jobs, but we've been consistently low on output gains. Forecasting productivity has been a real problem for us. And in our defense, I argue that prior to 2000, productivity decreased in every recession. In this recession, it didn't, nor did it in the early one in this decade. So it's a challenging thing to do. We've been tweaking the models. Dan, for this time, has redone the way we forecast productivity. As a result, we've seen higher forecast. Hopefully, we're a little closer. Hang on a second. I've been suffering. I always need something to drink when I'm talking, but I've had a little cold. So, okay, moving on. So that is, we've done a good job on jobs. We've been soft on output. Okay, about us, the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting, we do economic consulting. We help communities with economic development. We've been doing quite a bit of work up in Central Oregon, and you guys got to be glad you're not living there. It's a wonderful place, but their economy has 17, 20% unemployment. And then we have the MS Econ program. I think we're getting 2 or 3 new students coming in next week when we start another quarter, so that'll put us up to somewhere around 8 or 9 students. We want maybe 15 at the max. It's a nice program, and if you have any kids, grandkids that think they need to go back to school, we'd love to see them. It's very applied, and that's the last advertisement. Okay, Ventura's recession, we're going to talk about that, the outline, what we're going to do. Talk about our indicators. I've been using the same 4 indicators now for almost 3 years, and we still think they're key to understanding what's going on. Talk about the United States, California, Ventura County, real estate, and then a little talk about a jobless recovery and what it might mean. Okay, so Ventura County's recession. We've lost a decade's worth of jobs. This has been an amazing recession in that our jobs are now about the number of jobs in Ventura County as we had at the beginning of the century. Per capita income, we've actually been here 3 times before. So this is average income. And we got here as the dot-com boom was going up. Then we had the collapse. And then we saw it again going up again in the 2000s, and then it's now back down. It's been pretty flat the last couple of years. Retail sales just tanked, and this is characteristic of this recession more than many, partly because of the fall in asset values. Everybody's wealth went down because economists believe that we invest out of wealth, so that was one thing. And at the same time, home sales slowed, and home sales are associated with lots of retail sales. So the combined result was just a collapse in retail sales. The unemployment rate, though, is It's not as high as it's been. In the 1980s, it actually got over 12% here in Ventura County. And so in that regard, it's been a little better than some recessions. Now, you know, I was here in the 1980s recession, and I don't recall it being as bad as this one. So, you know, by the numbers, it obviously was worse, but it felt different, seems like. Notice of defaults, you know, spectacularly high, if that's the right word, lots of them, and they're still high. And in fact, national news this morning is that there's been another pop-up nationally in foreclosures. And home sales, of course, fell way down. And the median home price, this is a fantastic chart. A median home price now is about where we were in 2001. We saw the big run up there where I thought I was going to be retired by now. And you know, what goes up goes down, apparently. So we're trucking along here, but it's been just an incredible ride over the past decade. Housing affordability, though. When house prices go down, affordability goes up, right? So we're seeing affordability as it's been in my lifetime, I think, in Ventura County. And we've done a lot better than other people, and there's just nothing quite as satisfying as seeing other people worse off than you. So. Okay, our indicators. So this is total bank charge-offs. This is one of just the key things. When the markets froze in September 2008, a bunch of bank assets went bad immediately. And in that December, or at early January, they announced the first time bank charge-offs had gone over $40 billion in a quarter. Never happened before. And it was big news. And since then, it went up to almost $60 billion a quarter, and you didn't hear anything else about it, except unless you came to my things, because I keep talking about this. This is the sign. The bank charge-offs are still over $40 billion. Until this number gets down to at least $20 billion, the banks can't really participate. They want to make loans. The interest environment's tough for them, but a lot of banks don't have the capital, or they can't find the borrowers, or they're spending a lot of time trying to keep those charge-offs from going up. But these charge-offs have to fall before the financial sector is whole again. So it's coming down, and some nice gains in the last few quarters, but it needs to come way down. Capacity utilization, what percentage of business assets are being used? We've seen some nice gains, but we're still at recessionary levels here. So we need to see this number pick up. And then this is mortgage debt. Now, there's a lot of measures, and some people will point to consumer debt falling or credit card debt falling and say the consumer's almost whole. We believe that mortgages are foundational for family incomes and family balance sheets, family finances. And this number is just too high. It needs to come down quite a ways. And it makes sense it would be the last to move, because for most people, it's usually the cheapest credit they have. And it's just smart to pay off the credit cards first because they're expensive, you know, and the other credit down, and pay it down. But the consumer is not going to be the driving force until they get this number back down too. And then there's the home ownership rate. This is sort of unpopular. You're now seeing news headlines just about quarterly saying that the homeownership rate's the lowest it's been since sometime in the early 2000s because it's falling, and it needs to fall. And it's usually presented in the news as bad news. The fact is, not everybody should own their home. And, you know, you may know somebody that they may be a relative that shouldn't own their home. And so it needs to come down, and it's coming down nicely, but we're still a couple of years away from it being where you want it. Okay, so they're the indicators. All the indicators are improving, but still unacceptable. I think that's the way to describe it. So in the recovery for the United States, this is the most optimistic chart I've shown in years. So everything to the right of that red line is forecast, and to the left of its history, and we've got 3% growth per annual growth rate every quarter for the next 2 years. We haven't seen this in a forecast for years. And in a way, it's a good number in that the long-term average for the United States is about 3.25. But it's also disappointing in that to offset all the losses we had before, we need some 5, 6, 7% quarters. And it's typical in a recession to pick some up. which brings it to me. So the other day, not the other day, every fall I speak for VICA, and they have 3 economists, and I can't remember Jim's last name. He comes from Montana. He's the most optimistic guy in the world. He's out there, and he's just giving these numbers, and I'm listening to him, and he sounds, we created 3 jobs last year. This is good. And I'm finally, after about 10 minutes into his talk, I realized he's got the exact same forecast as me, and he sounds a lot more positive about it. And so, and if Jim was here, he'd be saying, look at this, 3%, we're going to go up to 3.5% and all that. But, I think I do you a service by saying, put it into context, okay? This is a big improvement. We're glad to see it. It's disappointing at the same time. At this point of recovery, we'd like to see it stronger. So that's that. Then we're seeing job gains. Every quarter, first time in a long time, we expect to see job gains. And, but this is too slow. We need to see a big decrease in the unemployment rate, say a big real decrease in the unemployment rate, because the recent decrease we saw was because people left the labor force. That's why we've seen it falling most recently. It hasn't been because of any sort of economic vigor. And I think it was 36,000 jobs last month. We need 300,000 jobs a month before we're going to start making big decreases, real increases in the economic activity. So again, it's a good sign to see it. We'd like to see it bigger. Unemployment rate, we expect to see fall slowly. And part of that, we're going to be talking about the effects of long-term unemployment on workers and families a little bit later. One real problem is that the lack of investment, and the banks are having their challenges. Everybody's balance sheet all of a sudden became over-leveraged when asset prices fell. So it's not surprising that investment has been slow. What is sort of surprising is that the policymakers haven't used the standard tools that they used to use in recessions. So I don't know, those of you who've been around a while remember in the 80s and in the 70s, every time there was a recession, they would put out an investment tax credit, right? And we really haven't seen that this time. Government, our models, we have models. We do forecasting, and our forecast is that government expenditures decline every quarter for the next 2 years. And I have to tell you, I have a hard time buying that. It's never happened before. And, one thing that keeps surprising, we know the challenges. One thing is that the state and local governments had very, very serious challenges. And as they've cut back, excuse me, the federal government has increased spending. They look like they might consider cutting back. Excuse me just a second. So this is hard to forecast. If we see it, well, I wouldn't bet my net worth on this one, okay? We expect the yield curve, interest rates, to remain relatively same as they are now, but slight upward pressure on interest rates. And then let's talk about a little bit about double dip. Everybody's talking about, it's fallen down a little bit, but the possibility of a double dip. And first thing we're going to talk about is food and oil. So, how to say this? Every time oil prices start going up, you'll see something in national media about how we're going to start paying $7 a gallon for our gas, and it's going to stay that way forever for the rest of your life, and it's never happened. So we're going to look at a little bit about why that is. So this chart is the most fascinating chart on the whole day. So, really, I'm sorry. I've spent a lot of time looking at this. So what this is the population of the world on a logarithmic scale. So the bottom scale is just linear over time, and it starts at the end of the Ice Age, about 10,000 years ago. Now, I don't know who was doing the census then, but there are people who get their dissertations by trying to estimate the population 8,000 years before Christ. So the scale is 10 million. There's that first number, then 100, and then 1 billion and 10 billion. And what you see there is that 10,000 years ago, there were about 2.25 million people in the world. 2.25 million. Can you imagine a world with that few people? Just amazing. And then they sort of climbed up to 3 million and couldn't get past 3 million until about 5,000. So for 5,000 years, the population was under 3 million, and it just couldn't climb up there. And you look at that, And you know, in an environment like that where the technology is so primitive that you've got a huge biological reward. There's a small population, huge biological reward to kill the guys in the next tribe and take advantage of every mating opportunity. And I think that explains a lot about people today still. And then you see, you adopted agriculture and it started climbing. And then, you know, a few hundred years before Christ, there was a pickup and then a fall. I did a little research trying to explain that. I have no idea what it is. A guess is it was something to do with China, but I don't know. And even then, it was a huge percentage of the world's population. And then what you see, in a logarithmic scale, it goes vertical. Okay, it just goes vertical, and that population gains. We're approaching 10 billion people. Okay, in our lifetime, the population is more than doubled, and of course, this scares the heck out of lots of people, but not too many economists. And that's because of this chart. Oh, by the way, I should note that that chart, you can't see it on the scale, but in the last 40 years, population growth rate has slowed down quite a bit. Certainly in the wealthy countries. In the wealthy countries, they're worried about maintaining economy. There's people writing books on what happens when your economy starts shrinking. But even in the poor parts of the world, birth rates have slowed. This happened at the same time. At the same time as we saw a log scale go vertical, our per capita income, worldwide per capita income, has gone way up too. And since the so the story of the Industrial Revolution has been an incredible increase in population and an incredible increase in wealth per person, okay? Which then brings me to Paul Ehrlich, his book, The Population Bomb, Julian Simon, and what I call The Bet. So I read Paul Ehrlich's book in, I think it was 1971, might have been 1972. And Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, at least that edition was predicting famine, wars, and pretty much the end of the world in sometime in the 1970s. And it didn't happen. I presume the newer editions now put it 2010. I don't know. Because he's still publishing and he's still saying the same thing. So Julian Simon is an economist at Maryland, I think, and he made a bet. He said, look, I'll bet you pick 5 commodities, I'll bet you $1,000 a commodity that the price declines over the next decade. And that's just straight out of economists talking. We don't see the end of the world till we see prices go up, okay? You got to see big increases in prices for the end of the world. So Julian bet him, and he won. Every one of the commodities that Ehrlich picked actually went down. And so the point I'm saying is that oil prices go up, they go down. They're very likely to go up in the short term. They're not going to go up forever. The economics reasons are, one is if they go up, they cause a recession. Jim Hamilton, not related to our Dan Hamilton, is a very good economist at San Diego, UC San Diego. And he's got some work done, and it's convincing. Jim wrote the textbook, the PhD textbook on time series economics. He's not selling very many copies because it takes like a day to read a page. I mean, it's a really tough book. And it's like 800 pages, and nobody in the world's read the whole book, I don't think. But it's a great resource. When Dan and I are wondering what to do for some time series econometrics, we look at the book and scratch our heads, try to figure out what it's telling us. And his work indicates that the oil price increase that we saw in 2007, 2008 was a big contributor to the recession. And what's scary about that is if we see a pop again because of, say, what's going on in the Middle East, we would expect it. So my story is oil prices, food prices, and food's a whole other story. If you'd have asked my grandfather about the idea of throwing corn in the tank of the car, he'd have thought you're a complete idiot. But now it's policy and it's subsidized. So no surprise that the went up. So the risks are, we had some risks to the forecast. The U.S. forecast, possibility of double dip certainly exists. One problem, which was sort of the forefront before everything went crazy in the Middle East, was the Eurozone. The Eurozone has to come apart. It's just too big of what we call a currency zone, and some countries have to get out. Greece has to get out. Portugal has to get out. And how they do that will make a huge difference on the economic impacts. And we hope they can do it peacefully and carefully. But my observation of European politics is that at least since the French Revolution, they do it all wrong. And so I'm not real confident that they can do this without a financial crisis. The possibility of state and municipal defaults. I don't know if you saw Tim Hurt's article yesterday in the Ventura County Star. I hope to get a chance to respond to him on that one. I think the possibility of state and municipal defaults is relatively high, and it's something that we should at least prepare for. And then, of course, oil and food prices. A sharp spike could precipitate another recession. So that's that. Now on to California. Truly is a train wreck. There's two key statistics. I'm going to show you one and tell you about the other. And the first one I'll tell you about is domestic migration. Depending on whether you look at the Department of Finance numbers, the U.S. Census numbers, U.S. Census numbers show domestic migration, that is, people moving to and from California on net, has been negative for at least the last 15 years. Department of Finance disagrees for a few years in the early 2000s. But even they show most of the past 15 years. I say that, if you see domestic negative migration, negative net domestic migration, and the fact that California's share of the U.S. jobs peaked in 1990, these are clear signs that California has a problem. California does not have the future it used to have. And it climbed up a little bit in the 2000s. It's since been declining rather precipitously, and current trends, we would indicate that it's just it's entered into a long-term decline as a proportion of the United States economy. So why the peak? Domestic migration has been negative. Jack O'Connell's going to be talking about education. And then the other thing I talk about is infrastructure. We used to invest 20% of the state's budget on infrastructure. It's now down to less than 5%. And anybody spends any time on the roads sees at least part of the problem. So then there's North Dakota, Californian policy. So that's the Rincon there, the nice, beautiful picture of a beach at sunset. And then this is North Dakota. And North Dakota, my vision of North Dakota is a cold, windswept, treeless, inhospitable little hell on earth, okay? And, sorry, Bruce. Bruce is from North Dakota, but he came here, right? North Dakota has 3.5% unemployment rate. And for the first time in decades, domestic migration in North Dakota is positive. That is, so for years, migration has been out of North Dakota, and now it's positive. And so, which implies that some people are moving from California to North Dakota, which means there has to be a huge differential in economic opportunity to drive that sort of change. And some people say, well, it's oil. The fact is that North Dakota was recovering far before oil. They got together in the Red River Valley, and they invested in their university. University invested in partnerships with business. The community invested in technology. They brought in Microsoft, and they have a booming little economy there, exclusive of oil. And since then, they've discovered the oil, and that's actually created a housing shortage, the only place in the United States. But the point is that California has all the natural advantages. We have more resources. It's a much better place to live, and all that. And so the difference, what I call dirt, and this is delay, uncertainty, regulation, and taxes. And you can't pin what's making California's economy so stagnant, so far below its potential, but it's the sum of the cost of all these, okay? No one of them is the key thing. And doing business in California involves lots of delay, lots of uncertainty. The regulation is the most onerous in the United States, and the tax rates are high. But I point out, North Dakota, the reason I picked North Dakota is it doesn't have low taxes. Its taxes are about in the middle of the United States rate. So it's not a tax deal. It's the combination of the cost of all of these things. Okay, and the last comment on California, you just can't regulate, subsidize yourself to prosperity. It doesn't work. You can try, but it doesn't work. And that picture, by the way, is why I got rid of my hair. Yeah, that's an ugly picture. Okay, what about the budget proposal? This got me lots of, the nastiest email I've ever received. I think it was, what was it? Classroom clown in a tweed quote was my favorite line. I think the budget proposal is actually pretty darn good. We're looking at about half the budget being cut with taxes, some tax extensions. I would have preferred to see the tax extensions expire during Brown's term, sort of sign that he's really committed to a long-term solution. But if the tax extensions are in fact approved by the voters, he's put this behind him, and he can concentrate on making California a more competitive place. I hope he can. So got an op-ed piece. We're going to put it on our own website here pretty soon on that. I go into that. But, you know, not a bad first effort, and at least as good as anything I've seen in the last few years. Oh, by the way, one other thing about his budget. First thing I do is look at the economic forecast. And here you can do a huge contrast between, say, the most recently presented national budget and Brown's budget. Brown's budget is absolutely cold realistic, okay? This guy wants no negative surprises. And I was real surprised to see this. In fact, the forecast for both U.S. or California growth, U.S. growth, and for government revenues is actually more pessimistic than ours. And we're like the four most pessimistic outfits in the country, okay? So we're surveyed by several outfits, CNN. Who else surveys us, Dan? Yeah, National Associated Business Economists, and then Schiller. And we're always among the most pessimistic there, so. Okay, so on to the forecast for California. We're looking at quite a bit slower growth for output here. Job losses, you know, this year, no net job gains in California. We just don't see it. California is just in a tough place, and it's nowhere near ready to take advantage of a recovery. Retail sales probably going to be negative, at least for a couple more quarters, and then very, very slowly pick up. And then, you know, I'm threatening to sing. So you guys know the song Day After Day, and more people come to L.A., don't tell anybody, place shaking away. Well, now they're leaving. This is the domestic migration number, and we look at more. Okay, so the risk, well, again, we're always looking at risk. Risk can be downside or good side, and it could be the U.S. forecast is wrong. And real estate prices are really hard to predict. And we've got a whole section on it. And we basically think that real estate prices are not going to change much. It could go down a little bit, up a little bit, but we don't expect to see any strong move in any direction. But they could go. And especially as people's continue without being in a job, more and more homes become at risk because people can't make their payments. The news this morning was over 8% of homeowners missed a payment last quarter. And that's an amazing statistic there. So that. And then there's Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown, you know, he's got a mixed past. And you know, the fact that he presented a decent budget and that he looks to be wanting to have a legacy and maybe erase the legacy of the first 8 years is that, you know, he could do something for California's future if he could get the state to become a little more competitive. At the same time, the other Jerry Brown may come up and decide the age limits are immediately upon us, and Lord knows what he'd do then. So he's just absolutely unpredictable guy. So Ventura County's future, not what it was like when I was a young person, that's for sure. Ventura County was, at that time, it was a place of opportunity. You could afford a house, you could raise your family, you could have a career, and young people, I'm using take advantage of Tim here. Tim has 2 sons that moved to Texas recently, and that's what we see all the time. I go to Connecticut to visit my grandchildren, and so we're seeing a reversal of the migration that brought us to California. It's all because of opportunity. So we're looking at positive output growth every quarter in Ventura County, slow but positive. Virtually no job gains. You know, if you showed a percentage gain, it's a little bit of job gain, but, you know, this is within rounding error, okay? So essentially no change in jobs, the forecast horizon in Ventura County. Unemployment rate, we've done quite a bit better than the state. And you know, just good, decent time to talk about why Ventura County's been a little more stable than the rest of the state. We've done really quite a bit better than the state of California in this recession. Part of that's because we've got some what I call stable anchors, and I look at 3 of them really. There's the Naval Base Ventura, which provides somewhere between 14,000 17,000 jobs total. It's pretty stable. Amgen had a hiccup a few years back, but they're a stable employee and employer and provide that. And then Santa Barbara. South Coast of Santa Barbara doesn't do anything, but it's not going away either. And somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 people from Ventura County drive up there every day to go to work and provide sort of the middle management for South Coast. And that's going to be stable. Their big employers are a hospital, university, state, county government, community college, that sort of thing. So they're not going to change much. Retail sales growth. We've seen recent pop. And, you know, there has to be, even if people, a high percentage of the population doesn't have jobs. Most of the people in this room have not seen their income interrupted. You might have seen it go down, but you haven't seen it interrupted completely. And cars wear out. You got to buy a new one. There's just stuff that you have to replace. And so some soft growth there. Domestic migration, Ventura County, expect it to still be negative as our children move away to raise their family. Okay, real estate. This is Bodie. Actually, it's holding up pretty well. Single-family median home price. This is Ventura County, and you know, forecast for next quarter is 244,000. Forecast out 2 years is 249,000. That's not much of a change. So we don't expect to see much happen. We expect to see slowdown. Now, forecasting foreclosures is really hard. In fact, Dan and Kirk had a nationally recognized paper on forecasting foreclosures, and their big thing was, well, don't even try to forecast foreclosures because it's too political. Forecast knows as a default. Much easier. So we get legal problems like we've seen over the last few months, and so it's caused them to decline, and they pick up. Government programs designed to delay them, that sort of thing, makes it very, very hard to forecast it. But we're looking at a declining trend, but still high by historical standards. Building permits, you know, I'm not sure who's issuing these, well, I do. At least part of that 202 was Ventura County Housing Authority. They took over another private project and started doing some building there. Then commercial real estate. This is that shopping center out by Oxnard, by the river there. And what was really amazing to me, I went out there Saturday to take the picture, and the security guard hassled me. He comes up and he goes, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm taking pictures." "And boss wants to know who you work for." "Well, I'm just working for me taking pictures." But I have no idea why they're so goosey over there. I was on the sidewalk just taking pictures. But commercial real estate. We've got some new data here that I think it's the first time we've had. This is absorption. So what's absorption? Absorption, net absorption, is how much space is leased less how much space is emptied. And it's actually turned positive for the first time in a long time. Industrial space, it's a good sign to see. Industrial space, what's been going on, the red line is lease rate, and the vacancy rate, the blue line. And what you see is that we've had a huge increase in vacancy and a huge decrease in lease rates. Ventura County's net absorption, volatile, but still mostly negative. And here what you've seen is the price hasn't changed much, even though the vacancy rate has skyrocketed. And I think what this represents is a few landowners who own some big buildings who would lose a lot of money if they were real flexible on the rate. So they'd rather take take the hit to the occupancy rate than cut everybody's rent. So I think that's the story. The absorption for retail, volatile again. What we've seen here, somewhere between the other two, vacancy rates have climbed, but not as fast as the other, and the lease rates have declined a little bit. So and one question this brings up is do we need less space? So, and by that I mean per person. And so the easiest argument to make is in retail. So all the gains, probably more than all the gains in retail, have been accruing to internet sales. A lot more is being bought there. And the result has been that your brick and mortar salespeople have been hit terribly. This is, you know, they've been hit with a combination of change in technology and a recession at the same time. And so I think we probably have too many retail locations for what the future is, as more and more purchases are being done on the internet, which would imply that probably not a good time to be building a lot of retail space. Now, the argument for office space is less convincing, but it can be made. We're seeing a trend toward more telecommuting and people working from home and then sharing an office when they get it. And that would imply that you need a little less office space per worker. And then finally, industrial space, some new technologies coming out. So manufacturing output in California has actually risen over the recession, even as the number of manufacturing jobs has really fallen. And the big part of that's technology. I got a tour of a factory down in the valley maybe a year ago, and they got a machine that does amazing stuff, and it replaced 5 or 6 people, and we're seeing that. And you probably, with the new technology, and then I don't know, if you ever get a chance, go on the internet and Google Three-dimensional printing, and look at some of the videos there. There are some amazing things being done. And one of those is that I saw a video of a machine making a flute, and it's called a three-dimensional printer made of flute. And it just boggles the mind. And that would imply that you may need less industrial space there too, manufacturing space. So in terms of looking forward, it looks like, we still have a mandate to upgrade the hospitals in California. So expect to see medical related, and medical is the only sector that saw job gains throughout the recession. Every place we've looked at, medical has gained jobs. So that's where some construction is. And there's some signs that apartment building, multifamily housing might be picking up a little bit. The rest of the manufacturing sector, now's not a good time to be a contractor. Okay, and then the final section, a jobless recovery. And some of the charts here. And I put that there in the CD. I always do some essays. And one of the things I mentioned there was the change in the people who are out there with the signs that we all see going in the shopping center and like that. And I've seen a trend toward people who are better dressed, generally younger, and all that. But the other day I saw a woman, and her hair was well done. She was wearing very nice clothing, and she had to be 50, 55, maybe 60. And she had this proud bearing, and she had a sign. And so, the people that are losing their jobs and the impact, these are not the deadbeats, okay? We've had 2 years, millions of jobs have been lost, and it poses a long-term problem. So this is the chart. So again, to the right is the forecast of that line, and to the left is not. And then I showed the horizontal. So in output, we're about where we were at the beginning of the recession. So we're producing about as much. This is not on a per capita basis. We could put the chart in. It's probably a little behind. But the fact is, even on a per capita basis, we're still a very wealthy society. And this is the job numbers. And so what you see is that jobs are back to where they were in 2003. And this is the United States. If you look at the same charts for California, this is the output. Again, we're back output-wise, back where we were near the peak. Job-wise, we're not even close, okay? This is a downright scary chart. And this reflects, well, we'll talk about what it reflects in a minute, last two charts. This Ventura County, we're not back to our peak yet, but it's the same thing on the jobs. The jobs have fallen, and we're nowhere near what we've done. So the story is, in terms of wealth, we're about where we were. We're pretty well off. But in terms of distribution, we're not, because we have lots of people without jobs. And this sort of brought, to me, my mind, if you're old enough, you remember Al Cap cartoon, and they had the SMOO, and the SMOO would do everything it wanted, even be food for people, and it turned out to be a curse, right? And so you sort of wonder about that. So one thing this brings up is the question of the natural unemployment rate. So before the recession, it was thought to be about 5%. And now there's people saying, well, it's now going to be a lot higher for a long time. And the San Francisco Fed, last week I think it was, put out a paper that appears to be the best so far to date. And they're saying that the natural unemployment rate has shifted from 5% to 6.7%. And part of that is they got split about in half. One is the extension of unemployment insurance. Now, I happen to be, I encourage the extension of the unemployment insurance, or some self-setting it, not necessarily that form. But the fact is, there are lots of people that are unemployed not by their own fault. The fact is also that some people are taking the unemployment and not looking for a job. There's lots of economic research that shows that a lot of people get a lot of jobs the last week of eligibility for unemployment. So about half of it might be that. And then the structural shift is that we lost 40% of jobs almost in construction over the last few years, while healthcare gained jobs. What's that mean? People have to be retrained from construction worker to healthcare, and that's not an easy thing to do, right? And I have a lot of family members who are in construction, and I would say their bedside manner is probably worse than mine. So that's going on. What it's not, and I think it's important to distinguish this, that chart I showed you before on the population and the output, it's not because of productivity. Some people are trying to say, hey, productivity gains are causing us to be unemployed. No, the productivity gains are making it such that we need to retrain. They're making the structural shift. So we're seeing a structural shift, the changes that people do, and that's being encouraged in part by the increases in productivity in some sectors and the computer technology and all that. It's not directly causing unemployment. We've seen massive gains in productivity over the past 200 years. It's what the Industrial Revolution is all about. At the same time, wealth and jobs have gone way up, and we've had huge growth in population. So it's because of the structural shifts that are going on because of this. Now, there's some people, in fact, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning talking about, well, maybe this time is different. And sort of the short story goes that the Industrial Revolution replaced the horse, and the computer revolution may replace people. And it's become a topic because I guess Jeopardy's had a computer playing somebody and kicking tail, right? To me, the computer beating you at chess is more meaningful. It seems like, you know, a game like Jeopardy just have a fast search algorithm and you should be good. Whereas chess takes some creativity and forethought. So anyway, we'll see how that plays out. So what's it mean? So one thing is that when workers are unemployed, and this is where if there's somebody that has a chance to go back to work that chooses not to because they're collecting unemployment, they're actually making a bad decision in the long run. Because as you are unemployed longer and longer, you lose skills. You just do. And it's harder to get back in. And even if you don't lose the skills, the market perceives you as having lost skills, and you have a hard time getting back in. And then young people, lots of research shows that when you hit the market, affects the entire trajectory of your income for the rest of your life. And so we've now had, 3 classes of college graduates and high school graduates hit a terrible job market, and we're about to have another one in June. And it'll affect these people throughout their lives. Families, you know, when families have financial troubles, and we've had millions and millions of people out of work for more than a year, you know, it increases domestic violence, the families fall apart, and all that. And then finally, regardless of even if you think the parents are shiftless drunks, the children are innocent, and we need to do something for them. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. And do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
During the 1990s, foreclosures, it took about 6 years to reach a peak. Your forecast shows foreclosures, them going down in the next half dozen years. What's the difference?
I think the difference is the huge impact on house price that was so immediate, and the fact that so many people were in homes that they shouldn't have been in immediately. So the first sign of economic weakness, they were there. But one thing that's dragging it out is there's still programs that are designed to cut back the change. Yeah.
But I see this as more severe than the 1990s. In the 1990s, it took 6 years to reach a peak in foreclosures.
This is more severe in that it's going to take. We're going to have high foreclosures for a longer time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Henry there, and then Betsy next to him.
Have you looked at the relationship between small business formation and the lack of job growth, either in California or in the country?
Actually, we have, and to me, one of the key things, and you know, I have to limit number of slides. I had 76, and that's too many already. But one of the key things of this recession is that the playing field has changed, and in fact, small business is the source of economic vigor and job creation. And because of the concept of too big to fail and people worrying about big businesses, they're operating with an insurance policy that allows them to do some things, whereas small business doesn't have that. And so at the same time, big businesses have direct access to credit markets, whereas small businesses have to go through banks, which have had their troubles. And so that's it. And then the last thing is that one thing we've seen in this recession is a huge increase in regulation, and particularly with Frank Dodd and all that. And that plays, again, to big banks. On a per unit of sale, a big company, a big bank, is much easier to deal with regulation than small businesses. So regulatory environment, insurance, and the financial sector have severely hit the small business. And that's why whenever you see Wall Street versus Main Street, this is what you see. And Bessie was right next.
Yeah, are you concerned about the rising cost of cotton and some of the things for clothing? They said that there were, now increases, and we may see increases in clothing costs. Is that a concern for future inflation?
So what's happened? Everything that's grown has gone up in price, and this was predictable. I remember when the first times I talked to Joe Howery, and we had breakfast, and then he wrote a piece in his Sunday little thing about Bill's crazy. And it was, this was when they were just really moving on ethanol. And I said, look, not only will corn prices go up, but everything grows up. Marginal land will be used. There's, this is what happens. And when you start burning your food. And even Al Gore's admitted that the whole ethanol thing was a mistake. And that's a problem. I presume that as people will eventually figure out, well, we made a mistake and we're going to have to stop doing that. In the short run, you're definitely going to see rising food prices, rising cotton prices. Everything that's grown goes up. And it's been exacerbated this year. You've got some droughts and some bad harvests and all that. Just makes it worse. But it was, like I said, I told Joe about it. He wrote about it years ago. And it was just absolutely predictable, and that's the shame. Yeah. People should listen to their economists. Yeah. That it? Well, I've been saying this for years, but I've meant it all along. I hope you have a better year than the forecast is. Thank you.